Welcome to From the Bleachers. I'm your host, as always, Shamus Clancy. Once again, having a guest on this week. Last week, I did a little mock draft with my buddies Ryan and Big Oil. It was great. You can listen to it on the BGN feed. I think it was From the Bleachers episode number 58. And also, if you're watching this on YouTube, we did a great little video breakdown on there where I shared the screen as we're going through the Draft Network's mock draft. It was a lot of fun. But again, I have a new guest today. First time on my pod. A great writer, a great follow on Twitter, does great draft work on our great bleedinggreennation.com. Ben Natan. Ben, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
I've been wanting to get on for a moment, so it's fitting that we get in a couple weeks before the draft.
Yeah, we do these, I don't know if you're listening to this, check out each week. BLG and I we use the Locker Room app, which is only available for Apple and iPhone right now, but it's a great little feature where it's kind of like a live radio station on your phone where you can kind of create a chat room. It'll be BLG and I talking, and then we could, invite listeners up to give some takes, ask some questions. And we do it live on there like once a week. We change the time depending on what people want, trying out different times, see what works best for everyone. We also download that and put it in our podcast feed. So check that out as well. But I was saying we had Matt Daring, the old "Oh well" him on the most recent Locker Rooms. Now we have you on here, and we have all these like BGN lifers now coming on the pod, which I think is awesome. But Ben is here obviously to talk about the NFL draft. Has throughout the entire season. Your stuff in the fall is always something to watch for, and particularly I think this upcoming fall with the Eagles likely having 3 first-round picks, or at least 2 picks in the first round, 2 picks in the second round. You're going to want to see what he's writing then, but also obviously right now as I'm recording this on April 11th, we are 18 days from the NFL draft.
Whew.
Insane.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's this has been an interesting draft season because of this being just such a weird NFL season for COVID reasons, such a weird college football season for COVID reasons, and then such a weird NFL season because like the Eagles just blew up. And starting the season with what felt high hopes, coming into the year, you have a new slot of weapons for Carson Wentz. You just drafted Jalen Reagor. You have a healthy Deshaun Jackson, and it's like, oh, things are going to go well. And then halfway through that Washington football game, the first game of the season, just everything turned on a dime, and you're like, oh, this is going to be horrible, and it was horrible, and then. Yeah, and then going into the offseason with a level of unpredictability about, okay, well, what's the team going to do? Is it going to be we get rid of Peterson, we get rid of Howie to keep Wentz, so we get rid of Howie, we get rid of Wentz, keep Peterson? Obviously, we know what happened. We lose Wentz, we lose Peterson. And they've just been hard to predict this whole time. And then from them going from pick 6 down to pick 12, it becomes even more of like a big question mark as to like what is their plan for this season. And it's very clear that it's not just a 1-year plan for this team to turn it around. Whether you agree with that or not, like they're clearly wanting to stack assets up, build a young core on this team. We still don't know if it's going to be around Jalen Hurts in the long run. I certainly hope that at this point, moving back to 12, that they're willing to give him a chance going into next year. But with likely 3 first-round picks next year, that's clearly where the team's got their eyes on. It's like, okay, well, maybe the offseason of 2022 is when you start putting together a team that can compete on a year in and year out basis. But they've just been unpredictable, and now they're at pick 12, and it's like, okay, well, what are you guys going to do? And for me, I think that we've been talking about the pass catchers it's okay that I'm like monologuing, right?
Hell yeah.
All right. We've been talking about the pass catchers in this draft class since October. We've been talking about Devontae Smith. We've been talking about Jalen Waddle. We've been talking about Kyle Pitts and even Jamar Chase. So you take a year off, and at pick 6, you had a good shot to draft, having at least one of those guys on the board at pick 6. Probably was going to be Pitts. I think that Chase was going to go be the first pass catcher off the board. Now it's, you're hoping that maybe Devontae Smith falls to pick 12. You're hoping that Jalen Waddle falls to pick 12. Maybe, in like a complete disaster scenario for Kyle Pitts. Like he falls to like pick 8, pick 9, and then the Eagles trade up. But you really got out of range for those top pass catchers, which is so frustrating given what was clearly wrong with the offense last year, which was a lack of dependable targets. You had this core of really young, inexperienced guys, and none of them had the experience of being the top target in an offense, and none of them really were able to step into that role. And you still have that group of guys with, Jalen Reagor and Greg Ward and John Hightower, and like you're hoping that one of them emerges as a solid target, but the reality is like you need to add new bodies to that group. I had originally thought that the team was going to go in that direction in the first round, and now it's like, okay, you're pick 12. Maybe it's a defensive player, because the defense also sucked last year, and definitely needs help. And I think the offense being so comically bad really had our attention rightfully on how bad the offense is and how we need to fix the offense and how we get weapons in there. But the reality is that the whole team was bad. The whole team was bad, and you're installing new systems on both sides of the ball. So you want to get new guys in on both sides of the ball, premium players who can change the makeup of an entire unit. And at pick 12, you start talking about Pat Certain, and you start talking about J.C. Horn, or you talk about Kwity Paye, and like impact defensive players who can fit into Jonathan Gannon's scheme. And in the short term, maybe this team in 2021 is a team that plays tough as hell defense and runs the ball really well. Because with Jalen Hurts and with Miles Sanders and with Boston Scott and maybe a rookie running back, and they just re-signed Jordan Howard, you have a really solid backfield, and you still have a good offensive line, and maybe you just invest in the defense. You get a J.C. Horn in there to play opposite of Darius Slay, and maybe get like a linebacker in the middle rounds, and then you can have a pretty solid defense under Jonathan Gannon's tutelage. And they complement each other, and you go 6-10, you go 8-8, maybe something like that.
17 game schedule now. We have to get used to that. There's no such thing as 6-10 anymore.
Yeah. Go 6-11 or 7-10. That's horrible. I don't like that at all. I'll get used to it.
There's no 8-8 anymore, unless you go 8-8-1, which is the most insane record of all time.
Yeah, don't put it past the Eagles to go 8-8-1. So. There's still a lot of options, and there's a lot of reason for excitement. Picking at 12, it's just frustrating. I know this has been a back and forth debate among Eagles Twitter and Eagles writers since the trade actually happened. It's like, okay, well, what's premium picks versus having a lot of assets? And it's like the Eagles had 9 picks in the draft before they made the trade. It's not like they're like struggling to have assets, and they're in cap hell right now, and you want to be transitioning to young players, and that all makes sense. But to think that the team was in some sort of desperate situation, that they needed to trade out of that pick in order to accumulate draft picks both this year and next year, it's not really the case. I mean, the problem is the team does not have difference makers on either side of the ball right now, or rather young difference makers on either side of the ball right now. And when you're picking at 6 in the draft, that's where the difference makers get picked. And especially if you're looking for an offensive difference maker. Now, if they pick J.C. Horn, or they pick Pat Certain, and that dude comes in year 1 and he's, a defensive rookie of the year candidate, and, the defense looks totally different, having 2 really good corners with Darius Slay and whoever the rookie is, like, yeah, I'll eat shit about it. And I'll be happy about it too. But you got to get blue chip guys, and at the end of the day, like that is what's going to help a football team, turn their situation around, is getting blue chip players in there. And the other thing is too, it's like Howie has not proven that he's good at the draft. He's good at rookie evaluation, and it's harder to screw up pick 6 than it is to screw up pick 12 in terms of who you have on the board. So from that angle, frustrating, but they can still pick some good players.
How would you talk to fans? How would you describe the defense that Jonathan Gannon is bringing to Philadelphia based on what we saw with those Vikings teams, under Mike Zimmer, and then what he also ran as the defensive backs coach in Indianapolis this past year, and what players, whether it's a target, because the Eagles could certainly go defense at pick 12, whether it's Sertan, it's J.C. Horn. I know J.C. Horn may seem like a better fit. We're going to see some more zone-heavy schemes with Jonathan Gannon, I believe. And are there, edge rushers you think are really worth taking at 12? It seems like a poor edge rusher class. And if not, between pick 12, pick 37, who are some guys you think would be ideal fits for what we're going to see from Jonathan Gannon?
So Gannon, evaluating Gannon, I wrote a little bit about this a couple weeks ago. Evaluating what Gannon will bring to Philadelphia is easy and hard at the same time. You don't know exactly what scheme he's going to be installing immediately, but it does seem that he is very good at evaluating who he has to work with, and then building out schemes from there. In his first couple of years in Indianapolis, you saw a lot of cover 2, Tampa 2, cover man 2 high calls that kind of keep things really simple for the defensive backs, keep everything in front of you, take a lot of pressure on them, playing shallow zones, stuff like that. Last year, you saw a lot more cover 3, which puts a lot more pressure on the perimeter cornerbacks and putting pressure on that center fielding deep safety, because he had the personnel to do it, which he hadn't really up until that point. Or he was, there was time being spent installing these philosophies, and then once he felt comfortable, you saw the Colts go into a lot more cover 3 or cover 1, and he this year he was working with Xavier Rhodes and Rock Ya-Sin on the outside and Kenny Moore on the inside. So you have these 2 long physical cornerbacks playing on the perimeter who can really man up well with any receiver in the league. And then you had this, scrappy, instinctual, smaller cornerback. I think Kenny Moore was 5'9", 5'10", playing in the slot. He can offer some run support. He can cover with tight ends. He can run with slot receivers. He can run with running backs. So that's kind of what they ran last year, and the Colts had a really solid defense, in part because of how good their defensive backs played, which is obviously encouraging. I'm very Jonathan Gannon positive, and it's not just because he looks like he can curl 200 pounds. So looking at guys who fit for him in the first round, J.C. Horn makes a ton of sense because that dude is 6 foot, 6'1", long arms, athletic, physical as hell. And he's that kind of Xavier Rhodes, Rock Ya-Sin type of player who can play on the outside and pair, I think, really well with Darius Slay. And I think Pat Surtain's kind of in that similar mold. I not as good of an athlete, but a very polished player, obviously NFL bloodlines, extremely physical. And those are the 2 cornerbacks I would definitely want the team to consider at pick 12. If they're maybe, they pick a defensive lineman at pick 12 with Kwity Paye, who I think is underrated at this point. I think mid-season he was maybe a little overrated, and now he's very underrated because this defensive line class isn't great by any means. It's not last year or the year before. But this is a dude who's played defensive football at a high level for the last 2 years. He's extremely high motor, gets a ton of pressures, great run defender. He can play inside and out of the defensive line, and he's a hell of an athlete. So it's you're going to get good football out of a player like that. And the Brandon Graham comparison has been thrown around a lot with him, and I think that's actually a pretty good comparison. And, we all know how good Brandon Graham has been for this team for such a long time. And it's he's not going to – I don't think he's ever going to be a sack master, but he's going to be a long-time contributor for an NFL team. So maybe, if they want to go defensive line in the first round and cornerback in the second round, which I don't think that is their calculation. I think it's going to be cornerback, and it's cornerback and wide receiver is going to be pick 12, pick 37, and they're going to invert them. So if they go wide receiver in the first round and they're looking at cornerbacks in the second round, Greg Newsome out of Northwestern, again.
He seems a fit for the cover 3, cover 4.
Yeah.
They're type and running for that from Northwestern.
Yeah, extremely athletic, smart as hell. big, physical, kind of once again fits into that mold that mold that we're talking about with that big physical outside receiver or a cornerback. Flying a little bit under the radar, I think, because he played at Northwestern instead of some kind of higher profile program. And I think he's going to be really good. Fidu Melifonwu is another player, the Syracuse cornerback. His athleticism is going to get him drafted, I think, higher than people are projecting him at. I mean, he's 6'2", with 4.4 speed, great vertical. Once again, physical, good ball skills. I think in the second round, too, that's when we kind of start having a conversation about maybe drafting a slot guy. There's Elijah Molden and Asante Samuel Jr. Those two guys immediately come to mind as like smaller, scrappier cornerbacks who are not afraid to come up against the run. Samuel has more experience starting on the outside than Molden does, but both could play really effectively in the slot. I think Molden in general, he's like one of my guys in this class. Like really, planting my flag on him.
Yeah. Eagles fans might be a little weary of the Washington cornerback.
Yeah.
I think this isn't a Sidney
Washington
Jones
corner. Yeah.
But he seems like a true slot cornerback who could start there for the duration of his rookie contract from day one. And you have to realize that the modern NFL slot cornerback is the same as a starting outside cornerback. They're not getting the greatest, the most important assignments the way they might be covering an X receiver out wide, but it's nonetheless an important position. You saw Patrick Robinson have a Pro Bowl caliber season in 2017 when that defense was, I think, top 5 in DVOA.
Yeah, and it's slot cornerbacks are starters in the modern NFL, and with a slot cornerback too, you're not just asking for a guy who can cover well. You're asking for a guy who's able to come up and stop the run, because the amount of times that a team is going 3 wide, 4 wide, and running the ball, your slot cornerbacks turn into box defenders, and you need to have guys who aren't afraid to get up in traffic and stop a running back, or deal with screen passes, short passes, stuff like that. And Molden is a smart, solid coverage defender, but also a physical tackler and good at coming downhill. And I think that's worthwhile when evaluating him. And Samuel is the same way. And there's also like the nostalgia factor with drafting Asante Samuel, and he's a ball hawk, and he's like, I don't want to like compare him to his dad, but like it's
impossible not to, right?
Yeah, it's inevitable. But like people hear Asante Samuel and they're like, okay, that guy's gonna pick off a lot of passes. He can't tackle for shit. But Asante Samuel Jr. is like a good tackler and like a willing tackler, and that's sometimes all you can ask from cornerbacks is like, are you going to try to tackle a player? So at pick 37, if they go with a receiver in the first round, I think that the possibility of them drafting a slot defender goes up, but they might put that off until like the 3rd round or something like that. But definitely, like looking at the first 2 rounds, the cornerbacks that really kind of like put the big like star on for the Eagles are J.C. Horn, Pat Surtain, Fidu Melifonwu, Greg Newsome, and then probably Tyson Campbell as well out of Georgia, another big athlete. I think that's going to be really their type for their outside cornerbacks. They've gotten significantly smaller at cornerback the last few years, and I think that's been one of the many reasons they've gotten picked on a lot. I mean, for a bunch of other reasons. So I think that's kind of like the. Obviously, they could go defensive line in the first round. That's always possible with Howie Roseman. I know that people are still talking about them drafting a linebacker in the first round. I don't think that's going to happen. I would be shocked if that happened. I know that Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah talked about, he had conversations with Philadelphia, the Notre Dame linebacker, and I know that he's projected to go in the first round, but I would be shocked if they drafted him in the first round. If he fell to the second round, absolutely. But drafting him, in the top 15 would be a different trend for Howie, on top of just being a little bit of a puzzling pick, I think.
Let's talk about the inverse. We've seen everyone talks about Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, and previously, before the Eagles traded down from 6 to 12, Jamar Chase and Kyle Pitts. So we've seen if they draft a receiver in round 1, they go cornerback in round 2, and it could be Asante Samuel Jr., Elijah Molden. Let's talk about the inverse. They take Surtain, they take J.C. Horn, they take someone out of the blue like Caleb Farley. which I
Oh
wouldn't be in
yeah,
favor
that's
for because of the injury history kind of throws me off. But if that was the situation where they're going cornerback in round one, who are some receivers you would like at 37? I'm into like an Elijah Moore, who I think can play Z receiver as well as in the slot. Depends on what they want to do with Jalen Reagor. I think those guys can be interchangeable in that way. So who are you looking at?
So this is something that I think Eagles fans might disagree with me on this, but I think when looking at wide receivers in this class, the Eagles need somebody who can come in tomorrow and catch 60 passes, catch
Agreed.
70 passes.
Agreed.
They whether we liked it or not, like the Jalen Reagor pick was all about swinging for the fences. You have this like extremely athletic guy out of TCU who was making all these plays down the field as a returner, and like on sweeps, like a playmaker, a legit playmaker at TCU. And it didn't pan out in his rookie year. It might pan out in his second year, God willing. But they need a guy who can come in tomorrow and immediately be a dependable target for whoever the quarterback is. And that's why, I was, back when they were picking up at 6, like I was kind of beating the drum for Devontae Smith, because I don't think there's a question about his ability to like immediately make a difference on an NFL team. And like I was like parsing hairs between all the top targets in the draft. So looking at what they could do at pick 37, like I think that still needs to be the consideration. So it's like a guy like Rondale Moore is a phenomenal athlete, and some people are now talking about him as an NFL running back, which is interesting. But it's like there's way too many questions with him for the Eagles to be like, that's the guy that we're going to bet this draft on. I would say it's the same thing with Kadarius Toney. Elijah
Florida
Moore,
guy, Howie might be in on him because of the Florida connection, but I think
that's true.
He's even more gadgety type in a negative connotation than Reagor was, where I feel like that's not the type of consistent day one target that they need. Day one being day one of the season, not day one of the draft.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Tony's going to be a really solid player, and he could actually be a really good player depending on, fixing the things that he needs to work on. But the things that he needs to work on are getting open consistently against, top level cornerbacks and catching the ball, which are things that the Eagles need like tomorrow.
Those are pretty important for wide receiver.
Yeah, it's like once you get the ball in that dude's hand, like it's game over. But it's like getting the ball in his hand is like a task in itself. Yeah. So Elijah Moore, like you had said, Elijah Moore is like a really enticing target because he can line up in the slot. He can play on the outside. He's got great hands. He's tough. He's a great route runner, and he's a really good athlete. I mean, he ran sub 4.4. So he's the kind of guy who can start day one and be. You can run the offense through him. At least in the sense that you have a guy who can actually catch targets consistently. Tylan Wallace is another guy. I'm going to keep saying his name all off season until the Eagles inevitably pass on him and he goes for 800 yards in his rookie season. Wallace had like a down year this past year at Oklahoma State, but he is, 6 foot, 190 pounds, really good athlete, and he's good at playing above the rim. He's got strong hands. He makes tough catches, contested catches. Was playing with bad quarterbacks at Oklahoma State and still produced at a pretty decent level. And once again, like I think he's like the type of like dependable target who can catch anything you throw his way that the Eagles should be looking at. I don't know if he's gonna. Like this. Rashad Bateman probably has the largest range of where he could go. Because some people think he's a top 3 wide receiver in the class. Some people don't think he's a top 7 wide receiver in the class. So like he could go anywhere from the top 15 to the second round. He's kind of like T. Higgins in that way from last year, where it's like, okay, this guy's definitely good at football. I just don't know how good the NFL thinks he is. So like if he's at 37, I would sprint to the podium, go and draft him because I compared him to Stevie Johnson. He's tough, great route runner, really good hands, just a really smart football player. And I think those are the kind of guys the team should be really looking at. I know Terrace Marshall is another player who people are a big fan of. I think that he had kind of like a one-dimensional role at LSU. Saw a lot of targets down the field, which is like not a bad thing. And that's the thing. Like I wrote about this and I got a lot of heat for saying this, but like he was a one-trick pony, but the one trick that he did was really important and really good, and he's really good at it. But in a class that's this stacked, you have to look at how complete guys' games are, and those are like the little things that separate them from each other. So, Marshall being like a late first round pick on the right team, or a high second round pick, doesn't mean that he's bad by any means. It just means this wide receiver class for like the third year in a row or the second year in a row is really good and really loaded. And the things that separate these guys are just really minute details and preferences. So Marshall, I think, is another worthwhile target at the top of the second round if he makes it that far.
Yeah, he seems the type of player that if he ends up in New Orleans or Kansas City at the end of the first round, he'll go in to have like a multiple Pro Bowl career. Or if he goes high second round to the Jets, he'll flounder and just be like, "Oh, that was actually one of the few LSU wide receivers who was a miss on draft day."
Right. I mean, yeah, and that's the thing with all of these guys is where they end up is going to determine our perception of them. Which sucks because it's like that shouldn't be the way that it works. But I think that Marshall is no doubt very talented, but I do think that maybe he's getting a little bit like late draft cycle hype because like we just kind of like go through all the names, so we're not saying the same names every week in draft articles. It's like, well, now this guy's the top 3 wide receiver in the class. Now this guy's the top 3 wide receiver in the class. Yeah.
So what do you think of this safety class? Because whether it's Jonathan Gannon's defense specifically or just looking at the trends across the league over the last handful of years, I've come to think that the safety position is the most integral part of a defense outside of pass rush, obviously, more so than cornerback. And in a situation where we're probably going to see a lot of zone coverage on the outside between the cornerbacks, not to say that they're always going to be in zone. In high leverage situations, there is going to be man coverage in Jonathan Gannon's defense. But a safety who can do a little bit of everything really well feels like an integral part of a great defense to me. What do you think of this class? Trevin Moehrig from TCU, he seems like a guy I really like, does a little bit of everything, as I said, to kind of you don't need a guy who does one thing exceptionally well at safety. I think you want a guy who's multifaceted, even if he doesn't have elite traits in one of those categories. Is he someone you would think could be in play at 12? Is he a trade down candidate? Do you even have him as a first round grade? Because it doesn't really seem like a situation where this is a strong class, akin to the way that this isn't a huge edge rusher class.
With the safety class, it's definitely a weaker year for safety, but Trevon Moehrig definitely stands out as being the best player. And like you said, he's a very complete game. He's a guy who quarterbacked the defense and definitely quarterbacked the secondary while he was at TCU. It's interesting because he's built like a strong safety, but he plays free safety and he plays it well. He's rangy, he's smart, he's got good ball skills. And if the Eagles are going to be doing a lot of single high looks, that puts a lot of pressure, obviously, on your center fielder because they need to kind of determine where the help needs to be, and they have to have the range to flip to either side of the field. And we don't know how much trust Gannon might be putting in the various cornerbacks, especially with Darius Slay, maybe giving him less help over the top, but. With the Anthony Harris signing, I kind of like backed off from the Eagles getting a safety really high because I think Harris is a really solid player and can play that center fielding position, at least as a stopgap. Moehrig, I mean, if they traded back again and they got Moehrig maybe in the 20s, I think that'd be a really good pick for them. If they were able to get him at the top of the second round, I think that'd be a really good pick for them. But besides that, I don't see a ton of guys in this class that like I'm pounding the table for. Ardarius Washington actually is another player that I think is really interesting. He's the other TCU safety who actually, like, funny enough, like really reminds me of Rodney McLeod, like small, scrappy, really athletic, really rangy. But I think his size is probably going to push him into like late day 2, maybe early day 3. And then there's I really don't want to botch his name. Hamza Nasildreen. If I pronounce it wrong. Yeah, the Florida State safety. If I pronounce that wrong, I apologize. It's like you spend so much time writing about these guys and you never say their name out loud until you come on a podcast and you're like, oh, fuck, I hope I get this right. So Hamza, if you're watching and I got your name wrong, I really apologize. But Gannon's defense, if you're going into predominantly single high looks, that strong safety is going to be playing down in the box a lot. And when they were in Indianapolis, you had Clayton Gaithers fill that role a lot as that kind of hybrid strong safety linebacker. And Nasruddin is 6'3", 220 pounds. I mean, he's built like a nickel linebacker, and like having him down in the box could give the Eagles a lot of defensive flexibility, which is obviously, if you have him and you have like another good slot defender, as well as, who knows what they're going to be doing at the linebacker position in this draft, which I think they definitely will address, but not in the first round. Having a guy like him would give them some really good flexibility. And he I think is also a candidate to might just switch to linebacker full time. But other than that, like I don't see a lot of guys in this safety class that I'd pound the table for. Andre Cisco is another guy, the Syracuse safety. Syracuse had like a lot of
strong defensive back class for Syracuse. I really like Tro Williams too. I think he could play all over.
Tro Williams, yeah, exactly. And I think that Cisco is another like center fielding option. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing this guy's name right. Hold on.
We know you're doing it out of the kindness of your heart. So even if it's a mistake, you're acknowledging that it's a mistake and not being like Kendrick Perkins trying to pronounce Nick Vucevic.
Yeah.
Video.
Yes. I'm just looking it up. All right. Jamar Johnson from Indiana is another guy I really like. He is kind of another chess piece, like a defensive chess piece. He can play single high. He can play down in the slot. He can play in the box. Like he's really versatile, physical, smart. Indiana secondary last year was sick, like really, really sick. And I think Jamar Johnson was a big part of that. They have some good cornerbacks coming out next year to keep an eye on. So like there are some like mid-round guys that I think would be like really good role players for this defense, but this class, besides maybe Morig, this class doesn't have like a guy in it, like a safety that I think is like a defense changing safety. So with the defense, with this defense specifically, it's kind of like a chicken or the egg situation with the defensive backs. It's like, are you going to have two really good cornerbacks that make your safety's job really easy, or are you going to have a really good safety that make your two cornerbacks jobs really easy, or three cornerbacks jobs really easy? And I think for the Eagles this year, I think like going into this offseason, it's like we should make this cornerback group as good as possible, and it makes the safety's jobs just like extremely easy. And I think a good comparison, just off the top of my head, is like the Carolina defense from 2015. Yeah, that group had three extremely athletic linebackers, a bunch of really physical, good cornerbacks, and then they had Kurt Coleman and Trey Boston playing safety. And I think Kurt Coleman might have made a Pro Bowl that year or something insane like that, because like they just didn't. I mean, their job was so easy. You take so much pressure off of them that they can kind of just fly around and do whatever. And obviously, like the Eagles don't have Luke Kuechly, and the Eagles don't have a Shaq Thompson or Thomas Davis, and right now they might not even have a Josh Norman, but given what this draft is offering up to them and their current personnel, the direction that they should be looking to go is like upgrading their cornerbacks as much as possible, and then kind of hope that safety turns out, at least in the short term, and then maybe look at it again in next offseason.
Would you double up on cornerback? Because I think that they need depth more so than just a day one starter, which would be great if you're drafting a guy in round one or even round two. You want that guy to be starting outside opposite Darius Slay from the start. But it's a situation where how does this coaching staff feel about Avonte Maddox? We don't know that yet. Cravon LeBlanc didn't get re-signed. There aren't guys there. If you're taking one, like you said, you think 12 and 37 are in some order receiver and cornerback. So when are you going to double dip? If you want to double dip, is it a situation where you think a guy that you might have taken at 37 falls to 70? You just, call that number in right away? Is it a situation where you wait for 84?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the Eagles are going to do with all of their picks because they got 11 picks this year. But they need to at least double dip at cornerback and double dip at wide receiver because both groups are so thin and so young that at the very least, like you're throwing darts at the dartboard. And you're gonna keep, and the Eagles drafted 3 receivers last year. They should draft at least 2 this year and it's the same thing with cornerbacks. I mean, the Eagles didn't draft any cornerbacks last year. And by the end of the season, you had Michael Jacquet, who is a former wide receiver converted to cornerback and an undrafted free agent, playing at cornerback, and they had him manned up on DeAndre Hopkins. So it's like
not
that's
ideal.
where we
not ideal.
No, not ideal. And he played admirably, but it's like that's just that you're gonna lose every time in that situation. But the group is so young. Avonte Maddox and Darius Slay are like your senior members of like the cornerback group, which is not ideal at all. Maddox had the worst year of his career last year. Slay is still a very good player, but teams were able to pick on him last year because he had no help. And so it's I think within the first 3 rounds, within the first 4 rounds, if the team got 2 cornerbacks in the first 4 rounds, who could blame them, right? So I think it'd be a smart thing to do to maybe draft a guy who can compete immediately as an outside cornerback, and then draft a guy who can probably compete as a slot cornerback.
Yeah, if it's a situation where you can get a Fatu Melifonwu with the 70th pick or 37th, or Asante Samuel or Elijah Molden there, and then you have right away week 1 you have Slay on the outside, you have a Fatu Melifonwu on the outside, and then either let's say or Molden in the slot. That just within 1 day of 2 days of the draft, you just rebuilt the entire back core. Where it went from Slay was okay last year. I don't think he was the type of player that is maybe he got signed to be, was traded for to be a little bit older, and it just the cornerback that's very good but not elite doesn't really transform a team that's just middling. So it's a situation then where this could go from one of the worst units in an elite to potentially a strength of this specific defensive unit.
Yeah, and I think that's something we have to come to terms with, especially with the defense, is they're going to have a lot of young guys out there next year, and it's going to look ugly for at least a couple weeks. And then you just have to kind of come to terms with that. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think another problem that the Eagles have had, especially under Peterson, is for no reason at all taking snaps away from young draft picks for bad veterans. I mean, that was a problem last year.
Your Craig James plays.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we had this whole conversation with Travis Fulgham, losing snaps to Alshon, and then it's you had John Hightower, who made a bunch of big plays early in the season and then just disappeared in the second half of the season. Rager not getting a ton of time. I mean, throw rookies into the fire. Let them make mistakes, and then let them build on those mistakes. I mean, that's very much the philosophy that I buy into. It's doesn't matter if they're a cornerback, a quarterback, a wide receiver, or an offensive tackle. You got to let them play badly and let them know that they can play badly. Because sometimes you got to touch the pan to know it's hot. You got to know what doesn't work for you in the NFL and what does work for you in order to kind of carve out what your game is going to be. Obviously, there's plenty of rookies who come in day one and they're fantastic. But you're not always going to get that, and you just have to let guys develop, and guys aren't going to really develop on the bench. I mean, you have rare situations with a Jordan Mailata where it's okay, well, that's special and he needs to learn how to play football. But in the case of rookie cornerbacks, it's you kind of just got to throw them out there and hope that they develop. Because otherwise you're just wasting draft picks and wasting money on veterans who are bad at the same time. So I think it's going to be important for the Eagles to get young guys in there. And then I think it's going to be important for them to put them out on the field and let them compete with themselves and with each other in order to let the cream rise to the top, so to speak.
To finish up, who are some guys you like late on day 3, guys you would consider sleepers that you like for the Eagles. So it's not really about position there, or just finding guys who are talented football players, but that's on the offensive line. There are a couple edge guys that are like in the 6th or 7th round, or then any receivers that you're targeting there. Who's like your guy that if the Eagles, you're sitting there at 3:00 on day 3 of the draft on Saturday, you see the Eagles grabbing in round 6, you're like, wow, that guy could actually be.
Yeah. I do a mock sim every week. I'm sure that
I do 7 per day.
Yeah, and there's a couple constants in my mock sims. I love Cade Johnson out of South Dakota State. Small school or FCS wide receiver. He was a deep threat when he was at South Dakota. 4.4 speed, great hands, great ball skills down the field. He seems like the kind of guy who can come into a team and like maybe start as just like a role player, play on special teams, and then could develop into like a solid like third option in an offense. I really, really like him. I feel kind of the same way about Jalen Darden, like insane playmaker when he was at North Texas. Smaller, he's like 5'9", 180 soaking wet, but fast as hell, legit playmaker. I don't know how the league is going to value, him being a small schooler and him being a small player, but he seems like the kind of guy who might be available in round 6. On the defensive side of the ball, I really like Teron Jackson out of Coastal Carolina.
He's one of my guys. Teron Jackson and Jamar Watson are the 2 guys I want in round 7.
I remember because like one of the best college football games of the last, during the 2020 season was Coastal Carolina versus BYU.
Mormons versus Mullets.
Yeah, and the whole time I was watching that game, I was like, this Coastal Carolina defensive line is legit. I was like, these guys are tough. They play hard as hell. And they got a couple good players on that line, but Jackson is the draft prospect this year. I mean, he's 6'2", but he's like 265 pounds, so he's like rocked up. He's like a big 6'2". He plays like his hair's on fire, like nonstop motor, very physical, good pass rusher, good run defender. Yeah, not the type of guy that's going to test super well, not a great athlete, but I think a guy who could probably come onto an NFL team and just like get defensive snaps because of how high his motor is. You just throw him into the rotation. So that's a guy I really like. Tommy Kramer, the guard from Notre Dame. I think that like it's always a safe bet to draft Notre Dame offensive linemen. They're always going to be well coached. They're always going to play hard. Kramer's got a lot of snaps playing. I think he played both guard positions and might have gotten some time at right tackle. So you have that versatility factor going for him. Tons of experience, smart, physical, not a great athlete, but good size. So someone who's probably going to fall in this class, even though the offensive line class is like only okay this year. But I think like getting him in the 5th round, getting him in the 6th round would be like really nice. I mean, even though the offensive line should be really solid for the Eagles next year, I think it should be good. But they still need to get younger. I mean, they have a lot of guys in that on the offensive line who are on the other side of 30. So he's a guy that I really like. I'm going to throw out one more name. Running back is going to – I think that, like, the Eagles need to consider drafting another running back this year. It's not a huge need. It's not a huge need because, ideally Miles Sanders is going to be the centerpiece of the offense in 2021. Jordan Howard should probably have some sort of role. Boston Scott is still, like, a really nice change-up back. But, if anybody loses snaps in that group, I hope it's Jordan Howard. And I think that, drafting a guy like Kylan Hill – his projection has been like all over the place. Like I've seen people say he's like, RB4 in this class. I've seen people say he's RB10. Don't know what the read is. There's like some like stuff about like maturity issues. I don't think that's actually true. There's a whole thing about how he like challenged the state of Mississippi to like change their flag. And like, I think that there might be like some weird backlash stuff going on with the coaching staff at Mississippi State. That's like my kind of like tinfoil hat theory on like why the NFL might be down on him. But he is athletic. He's like very shifty and he is like very good pass catcher. Sirianni loved using multiple running backs while he was in Indianapolis and kind of putting them all over the formation. So, and I wrote a little bit about this. Like, you're going to see a lot of Miles Sanders like split out or like just playing like lined up as a wide receiver all over the field, and still having a guy in the backfield with Jalen Hurts. And like if you have Kylan Hill in the backfield with Jalen Hurts, and then you got Miles Sanders out there playing receiver, it's like you can really kind of create some mismatches against the defense. So I think Hill is another guy that I would be thrilled to have in Philadelphia.
Well, you've heard it from Ben Natan. Kylan Hill is the next Marshall Faulk. But anything else you need to plug, Ben? I'm sorry, I'm catching you as you're crushing some coffee.
No, this is water. Actually, I'm drinking out of a very stylish beer mug, but it is water. I promise. I'm not like day drinking yet.
It's fine. Last week's pod, one of my buddies was so because I said to you before we started last week we did our little mock draft. If you watched on here, listen to the podcast, I was talking about it earlier. We messed up and weren't recording for the first 20 minutes. So my friend was like slugging, and then he had to like, kind of play catch up after. Was like a little back up for that. So it was fun if you're crushing a beer. Sometimes I'll have one or two while I'm doing this. Yeah. So no worries there.
No, I got nothing else. I mean, my work is I'm gonna start because the draft is coming up. I just put out my wide receiver rankings on Friday, which everybody agreed with and nobody got mad at me about. Thank you. And I will have more rankings out this week. I'm trying to like release them in the order of like need for the Eagles. So cornerbacks is going to come out tomorrow. Probably linebackers will come out on Tuesday. I'm going to try to keep a steady flow of it just so like all the rankings are out there. They're public before the draft. And then before we know it, it's going to be Thursday in late April, and we're all going to be totally happy with what the Eagles do.
Oh, no, without a doubt. But yeah, that's it for us. Be sure to like and subscribe on the BGN radio feed. If you're on a platform you could throw us a review, please do that so as well. And then also, if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel. We're trying to boost that up and keep bringing you content, whether it's like the pods that I'm doing on here. Maybe we'll even incorporate some stuff as we get closer to the draft, and maybe have some live draft reactions to coming up in the week of the draft. So that's it for me. Thank you, Ben, for coming on. Go Birds. Talk to you next week.